Hi, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is our March 2023 meeting. I cannot believe it's 2023. What a strange idea that we're that far in the future. And I want to thank you guys for spending your Sunday morning with us. We've got a really interesting book this month. It's a really good book. It's probably one of the more challenging books that we picked up until this point, and that was one of the things I really liked about it. The book is Why Don't You Love Me? And we're really happy to be joined by Paul RAINEY, who's right there.
Hello.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Brian.
How are you,
Hello,
sir?
everyone. I'm all right, thank you. I've got a big scab on my nose, which appeared in time for today's broadcast.
Yeah,
so,
of course, because you know why would you want to be on camera without
exactly.
Yeah.
No,
very good.
Don't stare at it. That's all I'm asking everyone not to do. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. So I asked the first question in every one of these interviews as the same question, and because I really like this question, and it's why comics? Comics are an intensely difficult thing to do. Very, very labor intensive, and there's really not a tremendous amount of rewards for most people most of the time. So why is that the medium that you like to work in?
I don't know. I read comics. I've always read comics. I love comics, certainly since the age of 7. And when you read comics, I guess we all try and make our own. And that's really what happened. It's just something I've done. I guess a lot of my peers are musicians and stuff, but I always thought comics was my USP, I guess, and I didn't really feel that I could be just a writer or just an artist or anything else. It just seemed perfect for me, and I always had this faith in the art form that it had more of a broader appeal than old people like me were led to believe when we were kids. So yeah, I think that's why I was always fascinated by how they work and deconstructing them, and trying to recreate what I liked so much about them, I guess. So yeah, that's my longer answer, but the short answer is I don't know. I feel they chose me rather than I chose comics. Well, sometimes I wish I hadn't been chosen by comics, but
right. Yeah, I understand that. What's the first comics you remember reading?
So in the UK, Marvel did black and white reprints that were published weekly rather than monthly, and they would chop an American comic up into halves or thirds or quarters. And I was a big fan of Planet of the Apes. Live action TV show. I don't know if you remember that, or if you're old enough to remember that.
Sure.
So I thought it was great. So you'd be on Sunday nights on ITV, and it was on at 7:15 for an hour. And as you know, Sunday is technically a school night. So my bedtime was 8 o'clock, and my parents were always very strict. So the reason I remember this is because they allowed me to stay up the extra quarter of an hour to watch the end of the program. Mm-hmm. And they used to advertise comics on television. So one Saturday morning, I saw an advert for Planet of the Apes, and I went, I really must have that. But then it was about another 3 weeks or something before I saw a copy somewhere. I didn't know how you even go about getting a comic. I think I must have been in the shop with my dad or something. I bought a copy, and I thought it was terrific. It was the most exotic thing I'd ever experienced. I think it's like Planet of the Apes #4. And it featured the adaptation of the first movie, or part of it, which I think was drawn by George Tusker.
Yeah.
There was another strip in there I can't remember, but then the backup strip was Kazar, with it had Craven the Hunter in it, and it was drawn by Jack Kirby.
Wow.
And that was just I went, I love this. And Marvel, as you know, even these days they just do crossovers, but in those days they made you feel that you had to buy all the other comics they published, simply by saying, "Oh, you like Planet of the Apes, and you're going to love Spider-Man. It's even better." That's all they needed to do, and you just go out and consume it. It sort of went from there, really.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that they advertise the comics on British TV.
Yeah,
because that's not a thing. Like, you know, in the United States, you're like literally not allowed to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the idea is that if you're advertising to children, there's real limitations on what kinds of things that you are allowed to advertise. You can't advertise the same product on a television show that's aimed at children because it's not seen as fair. So you can advertise a different kind of a toy or a different kind of a story, but you can't go, "Oh, you like this? Now go read it over here."
Right. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure there's rules over here, but I don't know what those rules are. But
right.
It was like, so it was when I was a kid, you'd see adverts for Looking all the time on television, which was a weekly comic published over here, which was TV related. So it had like a $6 Million Man strip in it, or Day of the Triffids or something in it. But Marvel Comics didn't really advertise their comics, and 2000 AD didn't. But they would if the first issue came out. So you'd see some promotion the week that the first issue came out. So I'm sure, I definitely remember seeing an advert for 2000 AD when that issue 1 came out, or Prog 1, which I think if you were to hunt around YouTube, you could probably find.
Right.
Yeah. But after that stopped by the 80s. I guess it became prohibitively expensive as comic sales diminished and advertising rates went up. But it was quite common in the 70s.
So you bought your first Planet of the Apes comics like from a newsstand or something, I'm assuming then.
Yes. There was a great, huge display of stuff. British comics at that time, the American comics were very superhero focused, I guess. With even the horror comics were superhero comics in disguise, I suppose. Whereas in British comics, we had humor comics, adventure comics, war comics were really big in the 70s. And there was a big girl comic market, romance comics, kind of spooky comics, directed specifically to girls. But they were all children's comics. I don't really remember any older comics. Heavy metal was around, I think, and I think I remember seeing Near Myths, which I think is a British comic that featured Brian Talbot's Luther Arkwright. Very occasionally in a shop, but it was on too high a shelf and seemed too exotic for me, intimidating to me.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. And so once you made the connection that you could get comics from the newsstand, like did that start becoming a regular habit?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a period of time where I stopped buying Planet of the Apes, and then I think I went to a friend's birthday party or something, and I think the mother was getting bored with us, and for some reason she took us all to a shop, and I begged her, and I suddenly saw this cover to Planet of the Apes, which was the most exciting thing I'd seen since the first Planet of the Apes I bought. So I skipped a few weeks, and I begged her to pay for it for me, and she did. I was going, "No, this woman's weaker than my actual mother." She relented so easily, and it was nuts, because I think what Marvel UK did, they ran out of Planet of the Apes content to reprint. So you may have heard this story. So what they did was they reprinted the Killraven War of the Worlds strips, and they stuck ape heads in all the Martians. And then they would change the character names into sort of ape-like names that we might recognise from the TV show. But they didn't do it consistently, so they would forget sometimes. It was the most confusing thing to read. But
I didn't know that last part. I knew the first part of that story, but I didn't know that they weren't consistent, and sometimes the apes became Martians.
Yeah, I think they always looked like apes, but the names were never consistent.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I didn't notice that as a kid. I think maybe I just thought I was the problem, because it must be me. adults wouldn't make mistakes. It's got to be the fault of me. But I actually reread them about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, it's definitely them.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. And how old were you when this? Were you like a little guy, like 7 or 8 or 9 or something? Yeah.
I was like 7. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And I
Okay.
just turned 7. I'd been 7 for like a month or 2.
Okay.
So it's probably the same. It was probably the same in America. So the big TV season started September time, and you know, that's when all the new TV shows seem to start.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think the comics started a month or 2 after the TV series began.
Yeah.
That TV series was actually awful. The movies are great still, I think, but I rewatched a couple of episodes about 10 years ago. God, this is terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, there was a lot less choice on television then, so being able to see anything was sometimes enough, you know, even if it wasn't very good.
Yeah. And of course, apes were just monsters, you know, that's it. It's just a shorthand for monsters.
Yeah.
So that's it. I'm on board.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so I mean, Planet of the Apes, as you said, they started reprinting Killraven and pretending it was Planet of the Apes, but that couldn't have lasted very long because there's not that many issues of Killraven either.
No, but I think the American Planet of the Apes thing was a monthly black and white comic, wasn't it? That had like 68 pages, maybe. Had a good chunk of content, maybe. So I think they were just allowing that to build up for them to then.
Yeah, I feel like there was only, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like there were less than a dozen of those issues.
You might be right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar. I got those IDW, one of those IDW books they did one time, and reread a bunch of Doug Mensch. Is that how you pronounce this?
Yeah,
surname?
Doug Mensch. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And they were brilliant, so good. These are great stories. Yeah, I don't know why I brought that up, but yes, it created a sense that maybe those magazines had more content. But I mean, I don't know because I've never really seen those original magazines. So
yeah.
But, somehow, it doesn't make sense. You know, there does seem to be a kind of consistency. But it was about 6 months the weekly had been running for, and they reprinted those War of the World stories, and then they reverted back to unseen Planet of the Apes strips. And we presume they'd run out. Maybe it was some kind of perverted way of just confusing a bunch of British kids. You know.
Well, you know, the assumption was in those times that the audience turned over like no more than 2 years. You know, the assumption was that you read comics at 7 and by 9 you're done. I don't know that was really true, but that was what they thought at the comic book companies.
Yes, and that towards the end of the weeklies, they did start to reprint those original George Tusker drawn adaptations. Right. Which was sort of only about 2 years. It was about 2 years after the weekly had begun. So that fits with what you were saying.
Yeah. And then did you start reading 2000 AD and Beano and the war comics and things like that at that point, or?
So what happened was my parents were unhappy with the quality of my spelling, so they told me I couldn't read American comics anymore, which included reprints of American comics. So I sort of hunted around for like substitutes, and I never got on with the Beano. It felt a bit too institutionalized to me. But I did buy Action, which predates 2000 AD, which got into trouble. Action isn't the same as the Superman comic. It was a weekly comic that had this kind of visceral quality to it, and they did a kind of thinly disguised versions of Dirty Harry or Jaws. These movies that we were all too young to go and see, and it predates video and DVDs.
Sure.
So we had these kind of quite violent substitutes, and then it became like a tabloid newspaper scandal, and that comic became sort of muted and uninteresting, and ultimately got cancelled. But those guys went on to create 2000 AD. So I remember buying the first issues of 2000 AD. But I had a kind of weird. I knew I liked it, but my conscious mind wouldn't allow me to like it because I was such a Marvel fan by that point, and this 2000 AD seemed so different. So I was buying it for my dad loved it. You go, why don't you buy that 2000 AD? Because he always read my comics, not to vet what I was reading, but because he actually liked reading them. And he said, why do you get that 2000 AD? And I always felt that he ought to be buying it for me. The fact that he paid me my pocket money, that was just money I deserved as far as I was concerned.
Sure.
But he never did. And eventually, it was a long period, it's about 5 years. One day I just read it, I went, this is really good. Why was I resisting this so much? Mm-hmm. So prior to that 5 years, I had about 100 issues of it that I, dipped in and out of. But I realised eventually, I came to my senses and realised just how brilliant it was. I mean, it's probably a different thing to you, Brian, isn't it? 2000 AD, I guess you know.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people were reading it. It was quite widely read. I think it sold like probably about 300,000 copies.
Yeah.
But now I've said that figure, I feel like I'm making it up.
Yeah, no. I think you're right. I mean, at least for one point, it was a massive success.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was able to continue like that weekly shows you that it must have been doing well, because they wouldn't have done it weekly if it wasn't selling well enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as comic enthusiasts, we'll talk fondly about, say, Marvel Silver Age and how creatively fertile that period was. But I actually think it pales in comparison to 2000 AD's first 10 years.
Yeah.
The amount of characters and, how strong the writing was.
Yeah.
I mean, Stan Lee was good, but he wasn't a fantastic.
Sure.
I don't think he was nearly as good as anyone as like John Wagner or Pat Mills or Alan Moore.
Sure.
And they had a greater sense of subversion than Stan.
Yeah.
Lee.
If I had to guess, I would say that Marvel took off more because there was sort of issue to issue continuity that was really clear. And the books, as you noted earlier, the books tied into each other. It's like, you'd read a Spider-Man and you'd see Daredevil swing past the window and Spidey would go, oh, look, it's Daredevil, you didn't really see that happening in 2000 ADs because most of those stories were, for the most part, pretty self-contained.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Pat Mills wanted them to, he liked the idea of them all coexisting, but they didn't really pursue it. So Judge Dredd has met Strontium Dog and Rogue Trooper, but they're not that tied to continuity to allow it to stop Mega City 1 getting nuked, for example. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And especially because you were buying them off the newsstand, I think it made it considerably less likely that a kid would be able to follow a story from issue to issue to issue, just because newsstands are really famous for, skipping issues, So.
In 2000 AD, you had periods of times where it was unavailable due to industrial action, and you'd have no idea.
Right.
That caused some sort of panic in me.
Yeah. And so when did you start drawing comics on your own?
Well, I did as a kid. So my dad would bring back this computer paper from work that was all perforated, and so you got a sense of it being like a comic because you could create turned pages.
Sure.
But it was a lot of work. So I think I was like any kid. I ended up just doing that on every page. When I was about 14, a friend of mine and I, Robert Patrick, did a comic together called Clone, which was fun. And the guy who was in charge of the photocopier at school ran off 10 copies each for us. I don't know if he was allowed to, but he did. And then, I've been involved in fanzines and self-publishing since, really. So I did strips for a local arts fanzine called The Spot for a while, which were kind of Viz comic inspired. I don't know if you're familiar with Viz comic, but
Sure.
then I guess in the 90s when I ran out of money to go out drinking every night because I was a young man, I stayed in and started focusing on doing longer form stuff and self-publishing that. So yeah, definitely, I was dabbling as a kid, I think, as all kids do, and then I started being a lot more intense with it around when I was in my early 20s, I think.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Did you go to school at all to study art, or was this all self-taught?
Self-taught. I did go to a couple of so my art teacher when I was in the sixth form, which is when you're 16 and 17 over here, um, um, you can leave school or stay for another couple of years. So I did art. He said, I think you should go and go to Neen Art College, which is in Northampton. I live in Milton Keynes, and Northampton's the next town along, pretty much. So I went along, and they said, "What do you want to do when you leave art college?" I said, "I'd like to be a comic artist," and they kind of went like this, and I never got in. But there's more to that story. What actually happened was I hadn't put together a portfolio, so I panicked. So a couple of nights, for about 2 days before, I borrowed my sister's Smash Hits magazines, which were like pop music magazines, and just drew loads of pencil drawings of a guy called Howard Jones, who was in the charts at the time, and went in with those. And they said, "Oh, you've been drawing from photographs, Paul. We can tell." All right, okay. Then this isn't really what we're looking for, but we'll give you a second chance. Come back in 6 weeks, build up a portfolio, and we'll review you again. And of course, I did nothing in those 6 weeks, and then panic drew, I think, more pictures of Howard Jones. It might have been other pop stars. And then went in, and they kind of went like this. And then they asked me what I wanted to do when I left art college, and I broke the news to them. And I remember filing out, looking really dejected past all the other people waiting to go in for their interviews. They must have been terrified by seeing my miserable face. But yeah, but no, I didn't. I never went to art college. But yeah, maybe I should have done. Maybe I should have tried harder.
No, I mean, like from a style point of view, you definitely. I think your style is just great. I don't.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see. I was just asking because I'm always curious about where these things go. So you said you were doing like festivals and stuff and self-publishing comics. This started in your 20s, yeah?
Yeah. So I did a comic in the 90s called Memory Man, and I got a diamond distribution deal.
Oh, okay.
Which when I got the news, I was so excited. I thought, this is it. I can give my job up. I only need to sell 4,000 copies, which to me, I thought that's going to be easy, right? And then the orders came in, and I think it was 190 for the first issue.
Right.
I was this close to giving my job up as well. And actually, you have to get 500 done at least to make the unit cost. Well, it's not like today where printing's a lot more affordable.
Sure.
So, and then of course, as you know, orders for issue 2 are less. It's a depressing thing. But so I was going along to events with my comic Memory Man and trying to sell those. There weren't really that many in Britain at that time. There was UCAC, UK Comic Art Convention.
Yeah.
And then I think there was Caption, which was a sort of small press event every year in Oxford. And I think there may have been something in Glasgow, but that was a little too far away for me to afford to go to. So yeah, I was only doing one event at that time. And then Diamond eventually said, "We don't want to carry your stuff anymore. It's not selling." Right. And I was surprised I got away with it for as long as I did. So,
what about was Diamond UK in existence at that point, or?
Yes, yeah. So originally I approached Diamond UK and they said, "Oh, we're more than happy to carry this, but why don't you try proper Diamond?" They probably didn't refer to them as Diamond. a proper diamond. But I went, "Are you sure?" So they gave it a go, and they went for it. It's quite, yeah. Yes, but I realised that I couldn't really afford to do it through diamond, and I had to reappraise everything I was doing. I sort of rediscovered drawing comics for fun in the early 2000s, really.
Yeah.
And the internet was, there now, so I could post stuff online and satisfy myself with photocopying comics, not having to use a proper printer, and being a bit more hands-on, homemade, like super gluing colour logos onto a black and white comic, and messing around like that. And that was a lot more satisfying and pleasing than having to face the painful orders from Diamond that somehow are even less than the poor orders that you received 3 months before.
Right.
And I took it very seriously because I was reading Cerebus at that time, and Dave Sim was telling everyone to self-publish. And I think one of Dave Sim's things was you have to be reliable and regular. So I was trying to be that, and and I lost the ability to enjoy it. I'm quite happy the comics are made, but yeah,
the work of it became bigger than the joy of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the work of it becomes depressing if your orders are shit, and they get even crappier.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dave, I think at that point was probably selling 50,000 copies at that point. And when you're doing a black and white comic and you're selling 50,000 copies, you're making pretty okay money doing that. He
was doing very well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And I read something recently about him kind of having some financial involvement in Big Numbers or something. He donated money towards. There might be Big Numbers. It was something I was surprised that he was being more than just supportive towards, more than just saying self-publish.
Yeah, I don't know about that, because Big Numbers was published by Tundra, which was Kevin Eastman's of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles thing.
Oh, right.
And Eastman poured a lot of money into that company.
That might be why I might be getting confused.
Yeah. All the Turtles money essentially went to Tundra, and his idea was really sensible, that if you give artists money to make a comic that they want to make, as opposed to, oh, you've got to draw Batman, right? That theoretically people are going to make great comics. And a lot of really great comics came out from Tundra. But what he hadn't realized was that if you give people giant stacks of money to do comics, that in a lot of cases they just kind of fuck off and don't actually produce the work, because nobody's standing over them going, no, you have to get this to me by Friday or else our company will fire you. And that wasn't what was happening with Tundra. And so, there was an awful lot of comics that were being made then that just never got made. It was a rare person like a Dave McKean, because Cages came out really, really regularly at that point. But most of the other guys who were given those kinds of money were just like, sure, I'm going to take this and disappear for a year, kind of funny.
Yes, it's a shame, isn't it? Because Cages was terrific, wasn't it? Yeah. And
still is terrific, actually. I think that book holds up so well right now.
It's so mature, because I think he was still in his 20s when he did it as well, and it had such a sort of grown quality to it, like someone who's lived a bit quality to it. Yeah, I forgot that was Tundra, because it ended up being Kitchen Sink, didn't it? Like ultimately, Tundra stuff.
Yeah, because Kitchen ended up taking all the Tundra stuff when Tundra collapsed. So
hoovered up all these drunk, hungover artists to get them to finish their work.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they had a British office apparently. Yeah.
Tundra, yeah.
Yeah. And all the British guys had too good a time with all that money.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, I
Apparently.
mean, I would liken Tundra in some ways to say Apple Corps, right? You know, the Beatles had all this money and they thought, oh, well, we can do this thing which will let other people make art. And then most of the people fucked off and took all their money. And they're like, well, why did that happen? You know?
Yeah.
Kind of funny.
Yeah.
Kind
People let you down.
Yeah.
Let that be a lesson to everyone watching.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes the lash of the deadline and is what makes people make the art to actually produce it. So
yeah, I'm more of a slogger. I will kind of just do it regularly. But I've worked with a couple of friends who I know that if I phone them up towards the deadline that we've got, they go, oh, they'll suddenly produce all the pages in a week. You know what I mean? They'll get it in time, but I couldn't work like that. I'd never sleep.
Yeah. Well, let's jump forward a bit to Why Don't You Love Me? And can you talk to us about sort of where the book came from and some of that stuff?
Yeah. Are we assuming everyone's read it, or are we taking the?
Let's assume that everyone's read it, but maybe let's not give away the twist. Maybe.
Sure. So, what happened was I had a job. I worked for a bank called Abbey National in one of their head offices, and I've been working for them for years. And they got bought out by Santander, a Spanish bank. And so I was sitting there at my desk one day, and my boss's boss, who I'd never spoken to before, came up to me and said, "Paul, come with me." And he took me to this glass room inside the open plan office, and on the wall was this giant monitor that was monitoring all the processes of this new system they'd released without testing properly. And I was put in a room with 3 men I didn't know and told to look at the monitor, and then if any of the processes went too high or too low, I had to phone up the relevant teams and let them know. Now I'm pretty certain they could have automated that process. So I spent a lot of time just with my eyes glazed over, daydreaming, and I've been reading a lot of Peanuts comics. You know those Fantagraphics books where they reprinted Peanuts in chronological order. So I thought, I want to do something like Peanuts. I thought, and my idea was to invert Peanuts. So it's about Charlie Brown's parents going through a difficult divorce, and you only see the adults, you don't see the kids. And I'll do it every day, and I'll do a Sunday strip. And I realised that I couldn't do it every day because I had to look at this monitor on the board and earn money. So I thought, well, I can do the Sunday strip, so I'll probably have time to do that. And then I realised after several weeks of intense thinking about it that I couldn't really do the story I wanted to because it was my friend's experience of going through a difficult divorce and therefore completely inappropriate.
Right.
So I put that aside. And then there's another element in the book that I describe as a common idea. So a common idea, like the Truman Show, I feel is a common idea. That idea that your life is secretly being filmed for the entertainment of others. And there's been stuff on that subject before the Truman Show. You know, dramas. There's been dramas since. You know, it's fair game in my view. It's not that idea necessarily. It's what you do with it that makes it interesting. So I always wanted to do not that idea, but what I consider a common idea, which I won't say in case people haven't read the book.
Yep.
And so around 2015, I had these 2 ideas, and as is often the case, I suddenly thought, wow, these would work really well together. That it satisfied my desire to do a family sitcom, Sunday newspaper strip format. But I was also it also suited me because I've been drawing. I'd had a couple of things appear in David Lloyd's Aces Weekly. I don't know if you've heard of that.
It's a digital only comic. Yep.
That's right. Yeah. So it's subscription only, and the technical requirements are they like the strips to be landscape because it was formed slightly before tablet computers became commonplace.
Right.
And I went, oh well, my idea fits Aces Weekly, so that was a big motivator to do it. It meant that I wasn't going around to conventions and losing money. I was actually going to be getting some money, not very much, £100 maybe for 21 pages, but that was better than what I'd been doing for the last previous 20 years, where I was just, shedding money. So yeah, so that's the sort of gestation of it, but it allowed me to sort of express. Well, I guess everything I do is about trying to pin down something I want to express but can't in simple, normal human sentences, if you know what I mean. That's the purpose of any creative endeavor for me, is to kind of express something that otherwise I wouldn't be able to. And yeah, that's Why Don't You Love Me? I describe it as my spoiler-free description is it's a family sitcom, a sitcom about a dysfunctional family who, at the end of the day, still don't love each other.
Yeah.
But which is an accurate description, but completely insufficient, But
absolutely.
it's a good lure.
So this did run in Aces Weekly then? Is that what I'm?
Yeah, it ran. It ran in Aces Weekly originally. Yeah.
The whole story, or just a chunk of it?
Yeah. So they'd run 3 pages a week, and a volume of Aces Weekly runs for 7 issues. So they'd do 21 pages in the volume, and then I'd skip a volume or 2 whilst I did the next few pages, and then they'd run them again. So it appeared in 10 separate volumes of Aces Weekly. Interesting.
I did not know that part. Yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah, well, I wonder if Aces Weekly is a bit like a gym membership. Like, people pay to subscribe, but I wonder how many people actually, of those subscribers, read it, because the feedback was quite quiet and low. And then I serialized it on my social media, a page every Sunday, as God intended, and over time, people started to respond to it. You could see it getting traction, more likes, and people responding, and people actually getting involved in the characters and what they were doing, and going, "Oh God, no, she's going to have an affair," that sort of thing, or is she? So that was nice to see. After so Aces Weekly provided a little bit of cash, and then the social media provided the feedback. So
yeah, that makes sense. And so if you were doing 1 page every week on Sunday, you would have been doing this for what, 6 years then? Like as a serial on social media. Okay.
I think it's 4 years, 210 pages, I think. So just.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I thought it was three something. Yeah. 2. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know how to automate social media posts. So I'd have to get up every Sunday morning, which I was usually hungover, and then I'd do all the posts and then go back to sleep.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's the thing that I'm curious about, because there's a twist that comes a little past halfway in the book. It's well into 100 pages before you actually find out what's going on in the story. Was that twist there from the beginning, or did you come up with that twist sort of in your 3rd season, let's say, at Aces Weekly? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, because the twist you're referring to was going to happen in one sense, but how it happened, I hadn't quite come up with. And I don't want to ruin the book for people because a lot of it is there from the beginning, but the way it happens, I hadn't really thought about until about I've been 50 pages in. I thought, oh, it's a good idea if it happens this way, you know.
Sure.
Because I've been, I'm going to spoil it a bit. So if you haven't read it, you might want to press mute for a while. So I started having anxiety dreams about nuclear war again, which I hadn't had since I was a teenager. I just wake up in the night, you know, having had a dream about opening the curtains and seeing a nuclear bomb going off in the distance.
Right.
Well, I haven't done this for like 30 years. And I guess the world political climate was affecting me in some way. And I thought, well, actually, that, you know, my view is we have nuclear weapons. It's inevitable it's going to happen. You know, It can only happen if you have nuclear weapons. So I thought, well, there's an old, I'm rambling a bit, Brian, I do apologise. But there's an old 2000 AD strip called Meltdown Man. And it's a story in which this character ends up on another world, but it has these human animal creatures. I forgot what the word is when you have human versions of animals. But the pretext under which he ends up there is he gets caught in the heart of a nuclear explosion. That's just page one.
Right.
There's this nuclear bomb going off with this kind of silhouette of a figure, and the strip's called Meltdown Man. It doesn't seem to refer to that ever again from page 2 onwards. It's in this new world. But I thought, well, I kind of thought that would be a good way of explaining the experience that these characters are going through. And fortunately, I didn't have to retrospect anything at all to accommodate this new idea. But working on it, because it's a long project, I had day jobs whilst working on it. You don't want to work too much out. So I knew where I wanted to do things. I knew where major things were happening. I knew I would have to maneuver the characters from being agoraphobic to outside of their house ultimately. And I kind of broke it up, at least in my mind, as to when I would do this, although I didn't know how I would do it. But if you're doing a long project, you want to get the right things worked out, but allow yourself lots of space for spontaneity so that you don't get bored with it. Otherwise, if you get bored with it, you're not going to finish it. And that's a betrayal of yourself, isn't it? So, yeah, that's my answer to your question. Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting choice to make that happen 100 pages in, because it runs the risk of chasing away the audience if you wait that long, before you get to the thing that you're actually trying to say. That's why in the introduction to this, I said it's a challenging book. It is a challenge. In fact, I'll even say, I ask publishers to send me, the manuscripts or finished products, whatever. And I got this from Drawn and Quarterly, and I got maybe 30, maybe 40 pages in, and I'm like, where is this going? What is this? And there's this quote on, I'm like, okay, I don't know that I like this, and I put it down face down, which means I saw the back cover. With the back cover has the Neil Gaiman quote, and I went, oh well, let me see what Neil had to say, and it was like, it read like any slightly vapid early 20s story, and I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I thought. Like, he's saying why I don't like it. Oh, but then it came into focus, and it wasn't that thing. And when I saw that Neil wrote that, I'm like, okay, I've got to pick this up, and I've got to keep reading it, because if Neil is telling me that there's something more than what I think that there is here, then I have to get to it. And I got to it, and then I went, holy shit, this is a great book. And so even myself, who really wants to read comics, is really interested in comics, I almost bounced off it. If it hadn't had this quote from Neil Gaiman, I would have bounced off it. And so that's kind of interesting to me. That, I mean, I have to assume that if you said in Aces Weekly you're doing 30 pages, let's say, in a season. You didn't actually get to this until like the 4th season.
Yeah. Oh, 5th. I think it was the 6th. Maybe.
There you are.
At the end of the 5th. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess then my next question became, were you like, did you have an editor at Aces Weekly? What I mean, is David editing it at all, or
No.
is he just if you're producing work, we're going to accept it?
Well, I guess they have to like it. Simon Russell's also involved.
Okay.
So yeah, and Simon has been a supporter of my work for pre-Aces Weekly. So I think he helped sell it maybe to David Lloyd.
Yeah.
I think that David Lloyd, the rule is I don't think he really likes swearing in any of the strips that appear. I love swearing, and I thought, because in the first half of the book, it seems to be about seems to be a nihilistic, cartoonist view of parenthood.
Yeah.
That if it doesn't, temptation, if I'm allowed to do swearing, is to do loads of jokes about parents inappropriately swearing in front of their kids.
Sure.
And by deciding not to do that, it forced me to be more creative when it came to the cruelties they exerted upon each other, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's interesting about the Neil Gaiman quotes is that I did I fell off my chair when Drawn and Courtney sent it to me, because Neil Gaiman doesn't know who I am. I've been following his work since Violent Cases, and I loved it because it does sum it up. But I did a launch in my hometown of Milton Keynes about 3 weeks ago, and I put the quote up on the screen, but I edited out everything after the opening line. I was going to put the light on so I could read it. So I just read, when I began to read Why Don't You Love Me, I thought it read like any number of slightly surrealistic, slightly vapid early 2000s stories that were basically the cartoonist way of telling you that they hated everyone and everything. And then I just read that, and the audience was aghast. And then, of course, so I enjoy reading that first line out to people, and them going, "That's not good, Paul."
Yeah. Did you? I guess what I was trying to ask though was, did you tell them at Aces Weekly what the whole story was, or were they seeing it as you produced it? And so, at any point, did they go? At any point, did anyone at Aces Weekly go, "Where are you going with this, man"?
No one.
Wow. Okay, that's
the only time David Lloyd contacted me when there were a bunch of white panels and asked if that was supposed to be, if that was correct. That was it. That's the only time I got asked about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They liked it. I get feedback from them occasionally saying, "Oh, this is good,"
Yeah.
So, but I think it was quite different to everything else that they were publishing. Tony, I think. So, yeah. But yeah, I really appreciated it being in there. It was nice to see some money, even though it wasn't a living. As I say, so you get these statements every volume. You go, woohoo! £120.
No, that's great. My only contact that I've ever had with David Lloyd in my life was, I want to say it was 93 or 94. I might be a couple of years off on that. He called me up out of the blue, a transatlantic phone call, which then transatlantic phone calls were very expensive, as I'm sure you might remember. And I'm like, why is David Lloyd calling me? And he's like, I'm David Lloyd and I did V for Vendetta, and DC did a really crappy job of printing it. So I'm trying to call influential comic book retailers to tell them to have them call DC to have them reprint it better. And I've
Really?
never had that phone call from a creator ever in my life, prior to that or after that. And I thought that was just a very fascinating thing to do. Like, I didn't like what the publisher
Yeah.
did. How do I get them to fix it?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like those bands who would uh, have an old album re-released by an old record company and tell everyone not to buy it
Yeah.
because they don't like it anymore, or
Kind
you
of like
know,
that. Yeah, yeah,
it feels like that. It feels like
yeah,
he might have been better off just releasing a statement to. I mean, Comics International was probably around then, or something like that, or one
yeah,
of those. Or
yeah.
uh,
I mean, I will
yeah,
say for sure, I absolutely got on the phone with DC like the next day. It was like, I just got this phone call from David Lloyd. What do you think about this? And they went, oh, maybe there's something to I don't even
really.
remember like the chain of things that happened after that, but it eventually he got the edition he wanted, was my understanding. So
Did you did it? Did you look at a copy to see what you
yeah,
thought of the
I
production?
think he didn't like the way that it was printed too late, I think, for him. I
Yeah,
can't quite remember because it was, again, that was 30 years ago. I don't remember the details of the thing anymore, but it was fascinating to me that he didn't like the way that it had printed. I suppose
he,
this was probably the serialization of it, so the book
yeah.
hadn't come out yet. So I think maybe
Oh,
he was trying to fix it for the book, I think was what his goal was there.
uh, he's
Yeah.
he's such a great artist. I love his stuff,
Yeah.
and it feels a shame that I don't see enough of it, and I don't really know why that is. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did something for Aces Weekly, one of the early volumes when it first started, maybe. And then I think the last thing I remember was probably he did like Warren Ellis did Global Frequency or something, and there's a
Yeah.
different artist each issue. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
maybe he drew one of those. But
Sounds
that's the
about right.
last time. Yeah,
Yep.
that's like 20 years ago or something.
Something like that. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it feels a shame, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing that is actually kind of genuinely surprised me was that there were not more physical books that came out of Aces Weekly digital experiment. Because
Yeah,
to me, like it's got to be very, very difficult selling that digital comic in
yeah,
enough quantity that you're making any real amount of money. As you say, it's probably a gym membership for a lot of people,
yeah.
and they're not actually engaged. They're doing it because they think they should, rather than like, I really like this work. And so why would you not want to get the material out in a wider audience at that point? I
Yeah,
don't know.
I think some of it has been printed. So there was a strip I think called Santa versus Nazis or something like that, which I
Okay.
think got published. I think a British artist called Rachel Smith had a strip in there that then later got collected.
Okay.
And I know that David Hine and Shaky Kane did one. I can't remember what it's called, but it had cowboys and giant insects in it. And I think
Yeah.
that got
That came
um,
out from Image, I want to say, that one.
yeah, that feels like an image book. I know I've got
Yeah.
it somewhere. Yeah. So
Yeah.
some of them do materialize.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm obviously, I own a comic book store. Here's a rack full of comics behind me, and so I really believe in having that physical book at the end of the day. So, how did Drawn and Quarterly get involved? Did they see it on your socials then and then approach you, or did you try to
No.
sell it to them?
Yeah, I try to sell it to them, but I'm not very good at approaching publishers. I don't really know how to do it, and I still don't, to be quite honest. And
Mm-hmm.
very early on, I did 15. I sent the first maybe 20 odd pages to a British publisher, and they, like you, they found it upsetting. I understand why they would.
Yeah.
Some people find it hysterical, but they had the opposite approach. Then I don't know if you know, I won in 2020. I was sending it out. In 2020, I won the Observer newspaper Jonathan Cape graphic short story prize. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I sent it to a publisher around that time because I now had a contact, and they rejected it because they said they didn't want to do newspaper strip collections. I don't think you've actually read it.
Right,
That just means you flick through it, I think. So I wasn't really having much luck. And then I'd finished it, and one day I go, we've trailed to myself if I don't try a bit harder. So I went through I looked at all these. I got my books off the shelf. It's that's published by whoever. I'll try them. And a lot of people didn't respond. And I went, I'll try Drawn and Quarterly. But I assumed because I've admired Drawn and Quarterly from the beginning. I've got all those. I've got many of the first Drawn and Quarterly magazines from about 30 years ago. And I just assumed that they wouldn't be interested, but just give it a go. And I got an email back the next day saying that they really liked it, that I was a good cartoonist, which was lovely to hear. And it took them, because the pandemic happened then, everything slowed down. So it took them about 6 months to actually offer to print it. And I think their offer sat in my junk folder for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So, yeah. But, the whole experience of Drawn and Quarterly has just been a joy. It's just been brilliant. There's everything from how they sorted out the artwork to the production of the book. They seem to read my mind as to how I wanted the book to be. You know? Yeah, and marketing, getting a Neil Gaiman quote. I've got no complaints.
Yeah. No, they're a great company. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this, because the structure is, largely like a Sunday strip, was there a point when you were doing it that you grew at all bored of the lockedness of the format?
Well, I got sick of doing the logo over and over again.
Yeah.
I would happily never do that.
Yeah.
Right, don't you love me ever again? The problem with it is it's quite emotionally intense. Although it's not biographical, it's personal. I've injected a lot of real emotion into it, or tried to. So it meant that I'd take little breaks and go off and draw a comedy strip for Viz Comic or something like that, or do like another short project for a while, usually between Ace's weekly volumes. But just a sort of palate cleanser, I guess. That's the problem was the emotional intensity, not the repetition necessarily.
Yeah, I also meant it in terms of just the physical lock of the page, right? That every panel, every page. I mean, I didn't actually go and count on every single page, but pretty much every page has exactly 11 panels, and they're formatted in exactly the same way.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I just wonder
if I'm okay with that. I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good with that. I like it's just one less thing to think about in my view. I can then just focus on drawing. I don't really. I feel that I need to remind myself to think about the page as a whole. I think of the page as a whole when it comes to writing, but I don't necessarily think of it as a whole when it comes to design always. And I have to force myself. I think of comics as a reading experience, and I have to be more mindful to make it also a aesthetic, I guess, experience, and more of a.
Sure. I mean, broadly, I think that when one is doing long form comics, in other words, where you're giving the reader 4 or 5 pages at a time, let's say, you want to think a lot about page turn. You want to think about what information is on this page that gets you to the next page that keeps the reader reading. But in a Sunday kind of format, you don't really have to think about that at all, because you're looking at a single unit for each one, and so it can stay static from that point of view.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do the page turn as a consideration for anything I do in the future, because it's not something I've ever really thought about, and I think that's partly because I've and it might be rooted in a British comics culture, which are you know, 2000 AD, you'd get like a 4-page strip or a 5-page strip or a 6-page strip, and so therefore maybe the page turn isn't quite so important. You're working on making it work over 4 pages as a whole. I don't know.
Sure, but let's go back to the example of V for Vendetta. Now that wasn't in 2000 AD, but it was a serialized comic that was told again in 4 or 6 page segments. When you read V for Vendetta, it's really clearly structured. Like you can tell that Alan Moore at least thought about what happens on each page and where you are in space on each page, right? And what it's going to take you to turn that page. So I think that even in that, in fact, I would actually argue, I think that the short story format, like a 2000 AD, requires more thought and more choices from a creator because your palette is so limited. You know, whereas, you know, in a 22-page American comic, you can totally fuck off for 10 of those pages. And you know, and as long as, because it all works out in the end, right? But if you've only got 4 pages, you've really got to be focused on picking the right images and moving the story along in the right way in that kind of fashion.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you have to be, every kind of sentence and word and image has to count, which I think I tried to do with Why Don't You Love Me. I didn't feel that was one of the things I really enjoyed about the process of making it, by thinking of it as each page had to work on its own terms, at least for me, although all those pages then interlock together into that overall narrative. So I guess that's me thinking in terms of a page turner, because even though each page doesn't end on a joke or a punchline to a joke, it's kind of structured like a joke. It's just that the punchline might often be depressing, and that might then compel you to turn the page to see what happens next. So maybe in that sense, I was thinking that way. The other stuff I do for Viz Comic, it's usually a single page, so it's not something I have to think about. It's the punchline, I guess, in the last panel, or the revelation in the last panel. But I'm not having to think of it having to follow up with another page like that, if that makes sense.
No, that makes all the sense in the world. Makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. So, but yes, I am. Yeah. The thing I'm doing after Why Don't You Love Me, which I've been working on now, I'm thinking in tiers and pages, and then yeah, I guess I'm not overly thinking about what is it I need to get the reader to do to turn the page.
Sure.
I'm thinking about being understood.
And just because I'm throwing out these concepts doesn't mean that I'm like, hey, you're supposed to do it this way. Because that's the great thing about comics. That's the thing I love the most about comics, is you can do it any way you want to, and it all works out fine.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any rules. When I was getting excited, and it might be the same with you, in the 80s, one of the things that was said about comics is that it's kind of there really aren't any rules to it, and you can create your own rules. And just because it's now 40 years later, I still think that's true. It's our art form to do what we wish with it, and and although it's good to kind of consider these disciplines and apply those to your work, you can learn from other people's experiences. You can also choose to ignore them.
And you can totally add new parts to the language even today, which I think is much harder in prose or in film or, you know, television. I think it's much harder to add to the language, whereas in comics it's pretty easy to add to the language, actually. You know,
it's happening all the time, isn't it?
It's happening all the time. People come up with new onomatopoeia every fucking day.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating to me, that it's constantly moving and constantly changing, and how the passage of time works in comics is always being reevaluated by every creator. It's fantastic to me. Let me ask.
It's an exciting art form, despite the kind of problems of in the industry or industries. You know, it's still exciting.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. Let me ask you a little bit about maybe your physical process. Do you write a script first before you start drawing? Do you like how do you approach an individual page when you were doing this?
So everything I do, I try and have a different approach for. So Why Don't You Love Me? I did a page at a time, and I didn't plot it out, as I said earlier. I wanted to have a lot of space for spontaneity, but I kind of knew how. I didn't know how it was going to end, but I knew the big landmark points in the story. So I did that one page at a time, and I would like just do thumbnail sketches. I really try very hard to make the writing as good as possible, so I work very hard on dialogue and stuff. And then I would turning that into an 11-page strip was always quite easy once I cracked that.
Were you doing thumbnails first and then you're going and doing the dialogue pass, or did you write any kind of a script to begin with?
No, I just go straight into thumbnails and the dialogue.
Straight into thumbnails. Okay, fantastic.
But since then, I work by writing a prose, not a script. But my prose writing is very direct, and I then adapt that into comics.
Interesting.
Okay. Anything you see after Why Don't You Love Me that's how I'm working at the moment.
Yeah,
I'll show you some of the original artwork.
Oh, I'd love to. Absolutely. Love to see it.
Here's a page from Why Don't You Love Me? It's
that's quite big.
It was important to me that I made the original artwork look as good as possible for this.
Yeah.
But I did. There's No Time at the Present, which is a previous graphic novel I did. I would do a lot of fixing in Photoshop, and and I was a bit cavalier with the artwork. But this, I wanted it to be as good as as I could make it. So it's all on A3 Bristol, and
So is that? I'm sorry. Let me just make sure I understand. That's a page that the paper was originally this way, and then you turned it that way to draw.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought I was seeing. I just wanted to make sure.
So there's 210 of these around.
Yeah, that's quite big. That's like 2.5 times up. Yeah. To the final book. Yeah.
I forget you have different paper sizes, don't you, in America? But so this would be between B3 and B4.
Okay.
No, that can't be right. It feels like that's not right. We call it A3 in Britain anyway. So
okay.
Let me think. So that'd be like 2 Love and Rockets.
Right. Basically, yeah.
Yeah, 2 magazine comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And you knew it would eventually be down in this kind of a size and shape, right?
Well, that's what I hoped for. Yeah. I did halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through. I did I went to a printer and got a dummy version done up to send out to prospective publishers, and that happens to be the same size as the Drawn and Courtney version. But Drawn and Courtney suggested it's this shape and size, and I went along with it.
Yeah. No, it's nice. It is very nice. And on your thumbnails, are you doing your thumbnails in you're not doing them that big, obviously.
Oh no, they're just like matchstick men. They're not even,
Okay.
They're not anything to write home about.
Right.
If I used to do it on printer paper, I do them on there and kind of I don't have printer paper anymore, but A4 size, which is Love and Rocket size.
Right.
And and then I'd have that to refer to, and then as soon as I finish the original the artwork, screw up the thumbnails and chuck it in the waste paper bin. Well, people keep these things, don't they? So
some do, yeah. It depends.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on what kind of thumbnails you're doing. You know, are your
Yeah.
thumbnails detailed, or are they more stick figure-ish?
Stick figure-ish.
Yeah. Could someone else read your thumbnail, or because
I think they're unreadable. So I'm not even doing thumbnails anymore. Here's me setting up what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm just working out.
They're tiny. Yeah,
they're not even thumbnails anymore.
Yeah.
Earlier on, I was doing some. I mean, that's the level of thumbnails, you know.
Right. Nice.
So, yeah, I guess.
And are you doing? I mean, obviously, you're working on physical paper there. You're not doing digital, yeah?
No, I am now. After Why Don't You Love Me, I've been working using Procreate on my iPad, and which I'm enjoying very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for Why Don't You Love Me, it was physical paper being drawn in a physical fashion.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you? I just because I don't want to make an assumption. You're penciling first, then you're lettering, then you're inking, sort of the traditional.
Yeah.
Steps.
Brush and pen.
Yeah.
My lettering, I would put straight down, which apparently is not what letterers do. They put like holding lines, or I would put straight down.
Right.
But apparently it's readable. I can read it, and other people have read it. So,
no, it's very readable. Yeah, it's very readable.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the great things that Drawn and Courtney did, is that I didn't feel that my scans were. I mean, they were high resolution and detail, but I didn't really know what I was doing when they cleaned them up beautifully. It looks like a proper comic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it looks great.
Doesn't have all the light bleed that the original scans had, for example.
Right.
So they did a great job.
Right. And you said that you were literally redrawing the logo every single month, every single page.
Yeah. That was a mistake.
That seems crazy. Why wouldn't you just do it once and then just paste it in?
Well, I didn't know it's going to get a publisher. I liked the idea that there might be a art exhibition of all the artwork in a room.
Right.
And then people could walk in and not know where to begin to read it. They could start partway through. Right. I wouldn't be too obtuse. I would put them in order, but I wouldn't tell them which the first strip was.
Right.
And I imagined being interested by how people interpreted it. If they got something from it by reading it in the wrong order or the order of their choice.
Yeah.
I mean, that hasn't happened, but because my experiences with finding publishers hasn't been, as I said earlier, it's not something I feel I'm very good at doing. So, I was imagining all sorts of things for it, daydreaming, because it was a fantasy,
Sure.
Yeah. So,
but now you've got this fantastic, solid book. This is a real book. I love this.
Yeah, this is the ultimate object. Drawn and Courtney asked me to do this page in the book. Like a big title page. Yeah. And I went, I'm not drawing it again. So I copied them. That's the only time I copied and pasted it. I'd had enough. I have such an aversion to doing it now.
Oh, I love that.
Fortunately, they're okay with it. They didn't expect me to redraw it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, man. That's great. Well, good. I'm glad that the book, came out looking like this. And as I said, it was a challenge for me to get to the point where the story switched. But once it did, like a light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, this is such a great book that I really wanted to share with people. And I'm really glad that we were able to. Let's wrap the interview up with. I always ask the same couple questions. I start the interview the same, and I end the interview the same, just for symmetry, I suppose. So let's go for the first of the two questions to wrap it. Is, would you want to plug something else you've got coming up? Are you close enough on the production for your next story that you want to tell people about it, or where they can find it, or when we should expect it?
I haven't got anything. The next thing, which is I'm working big thing. I still have strips appearing Viz comic over here in the UK. So
Yeah.
I've got the current issue has a comic strip about Ricky Gervais buying hot cross buns, and there being a shortage. So if you're in Britain, um, that's my strip. And then the next issue has one about someone trying to con a homeless person out of £1 for the shopping trolley.
Wow.
Um, uh, that's in the next issue, but I don't think that's out for another 2 or 3 weeks. And then the big thing I'm working on is the working title is called Murder School, and it's a memoir of my school days,
Okay.
um, with me being a unreliable source of truth.
Okay.
So, but I'm having
What's
good fun working on it.
what do you think the scope of that book is going to be? Is it going to be another 200-page graphic novel? Is it smaller? Is it longer?
No, I think it might be similar length, maybe longer.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking of it as a murder mystery, but the mystery is we don't know who the victim is, rather than we don't know who the murderer is.
I like that. I like that.
But I've got to get the murder done yet.
Yeah.
So, but I'm about 60 odd pages into it, and I'm very happy with how it's going. But I'm working quite a different way. So the first page I drew was something like page 33,
Right.
and then I started having all the ideas for earlier pages. So it's kind of unlike this, which I did in strict order.
Right.
It's growing like a bomb,
Yeah.
or a muffin.
Yeah.
So it's yes.
What's your production rate like? Are you a page a week? Do you faster than that?
I'm quite fast when I get down to it. I'm a procrastinator a bit, so
Okay.
I tend to start drawing until about 1:30 in the afternoon.
Okay.
I'll do anything. I'll even do the washing up, redecorate a room. But once I start drawing, I love it. I don't know what I'm procrastinating over. It's just psyching myself up, I think.
Understood.
Yes, but then when I'm drawing, I'm quite quick, I think.
Yeah. So your murder school could conceptually be done in another 6 months or something?
No, I think it'd probably take a bit longer than that.
Okay.
Maybe a year.
Okay.
Maybe a year. We're looking for someone to republish There's No Time Like the Present, which is the book I did Why Don't You Love Me? So hopefully that will happen. And there's a lot of similar emotions in There's No Time Like the Present.
Yeah.
But more accessible from the start.
Sure.
It's not quite so it's not quite so much hard work required from the reader.
I understand.
I don't think so.
Okay, and then so then the last question is, as I said, we've been doing this for 8 years. I've been interviewing cartoonists. We've got 2 different clubs. We've got the kids club. We've got the adults club. So we're somewhere near 200 interviews now at this point. And one of the things I hear from a lot of viewers are that they want to make comics themselves, but they don't know where to start. They don't know how to start. They're nervous. So if you had a piece of advice for an aspiring cartoonist, especially given that you're a procrastinator, what might be that piece of advice? It could be something physical, it could be something emotional, something spiritual. I don't know, anything you want. What would be your piece of advice for an aspiring cartoonist, though?
I think the best thing to do is, if you're aspiring, you do start with small things. So do a 1-paneled cartoon, and then do a 4-paneled strip, and then see if you could do a page. Or do a 20-page paneled story, and work that way and build up slowly. I think if you have try not to be overly ambitious in the first instance. I mean, even Why Don't You Love Me is broken down into single pages, It's think in that way, it becomes less intimidating, and you get to nail, if you're doing short stories as well, we talked earlier about the necessity to cut superfluous stuff out. It's a good way of honing a discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And a single frame can be just as entertaining as a 210-page graphic novel if you get it right. So, yeah, that's my advice. And you have to do it. Just do it. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And get it out there. Don't sit on it. Get it out there.
Get it out there. Yeah. Oh, and we have the tools to do it now. You know, the internet exists. You can get your stuff out there, and you can even do it pretty anonymously these days. So
there's no reason why you shouldn't be breaking even, at least now, thanks to the internet.
Yeah, I get that. Well, very good. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I hope you've had fun and enjoyment with this.
I've really enjoyed this. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for everyone, having it as your graphic novel of the month.
Yeah, no, it's my absolute pleasure. Stick around for a second. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll come back to wrap it up. Okay. So Ben, put me back on a 1 if you would be so kind. Hi. So if you're sitting at home and especially if you're looking for something that might challenge your brain a little bit and make you think, I absolutely positively recommend Why Don't You Love Me? This is a very smart book that has a surprise in it, though he kind of gave the surprise away, but it has a big surprise in it. And it's going to make you think. Even Neil Gaiman thought you should read it. So, Neil's usually right about these things. And so there. I would like to say our next couple of books and interviews. The next thing that's coming up is the Kids Club, and the book will be Scurry by Max Smith, about rats and cats, and it's a cute little book. I mean, it's actually not cute at all. It's kind of scary, but it's a neat little book. And then next month's adult club is called Belle of the Ball, by Mari Costa. She is Brazilian, so it'll also be another Sunday morning interview rather than the usual Wednesday nights. This book is very pink. There is a lot of pink in this book, so look out for that one next month. I would like to do a couple of thank yous as well. I want to thank Jordan for being my producer, for handling stuff behind the scenes that none of you ever seen, but all this stuff couldn't happen without it. I want to thank Ben for running the camera and running the show. Thank you, Ben. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Zoe and Katie and KATT, because if they weren't my staff, I would not be able to sit here on television like this and babble about comic books without having them back me up. So I need them and love them so much. I want to thank all the members of the club. If you're not a member of the club, there'll be a little thing in a bit. They'll tell you how to join, but it allows us to have the ability to talk to cartoonists about craft and about making the comics, and it's really important. And then last but not least, and especially not least, I want to thank cartoonists, particularly guys like Paul right there, because if they didn't make the comics, I would not have a store for 33 years where I sell comics. So thank you, Paul. Thank you for doing the things that you do, man. And thanks for making good work. That's the thing that thrills me so much.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. Yeah, I've had a lovely time.
Yeah, very good. Okay, well, that's the show. We will see you all in about 2 weeks for the next one, when we talk to Scurry. And until then,